The stone corridors of Irefong Citadel held no warmth, even in summer. Avalini Loon kept her steps quiet as she moved through the servants' passage, a wooden tray balanced in her trembling hands. 60 days. The whispers said it had been 60 days since anyone heard the Alpha's wolf. Move faster, Omega. A guard's voice cut through the silence, laced with contempt. Avalini didn't raise her eyes from the floor. She'd learned that lesson in her last pack, and the one before that. Pale hair, pale skin, pale presence, she was a ghost that no one wanted to see. In the wolf territories, your rank was written in your scent, your posture, your very blood. Alphas commanded. Betas obeyed and thrived. And Omegas like her? They were tolerated at best, cast out at worst. Avalini had been cast out 3 times in her 24 years. Irefong was her last chance, even if she was only here because they needed bodies to scrub floors and deliver meals to chambers no one else dared approach. But today felt different. Today, the air itself seemed to crack with tension. She touched the mark of service on her wrist, the crude brand that marked her as pack property rather than pack member. It still ached from the iron, 2 weeks fresh. The Irefong Beta had made it clear, serve well, stay invisible, and perhaps she'd survive the winter. Fail, and the frozen mountains would claim another nameless Omega. What they didn't know, what she herself barely understood, was the strange warmth that lived beneath her skin. The way her cuts sealed themselves overnight. The way exhaustion lifted from her bones faster than it should. She'd always thought it was simply stubborn will, the body's refusal to break when the spirit hadn't. She never questioned why bruises vanished by morning, why her ribs had mended in days rather than weeks after her last beating. You're taking that to the Alpha's wing? A woman's voice, sharp with warning. Mira, one of the kitchen workers, grabbed her arm. Girl, are you mad? No one goes near him now. Not since. She lowered her voice to barely a whisper. Not since his wolf went silent. Avalini felt ice trace down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral. The head of house assigned me. I have no choice. Myra's grip tightened, genuine fear in her eyes. Lord Kalen was here yesterday. He said the Alpha's time is running out. Said a wolf who can't shift is no Alpha at all. She released Avalini suddenly as if burned. They're saying he's cursed. Broken. And broken Alphas don't last long in Irefong. The words hung in the cold air as Mira hurried away, glancing back once with something like pity. Avalini continued walking, her heart now hammering against her ribs. The massive oak doors to the Alpha's private wing loomed ahead, carved with wolves mid-hunt. 2 guards stood watch, their faces grim. The evening meal, she said quietly, eyes on the floor. They exchanged glances. One shook his head slowly, but stepped aside. Leave it inside the antechamber. Don't linger. And whatever you do, don't disturb him. The door swung open with a groan that echoed like a warning. Inside, the temperature dropped further. Frost crept along the windowsills despite the season. And there, in the vast chamber beyond the antechamber, she could see him through the partially open inner door. Alpha Thorn Varric sat motionless in a chair of dark wood and iron, wrapped in heavy furs that made his shoulders look even broader. Dark hair fell across a face that might have been carved from the mountain stone itself, all hard angles and sharper edges. He stared at nothing, one hand gripping the armrest so tightly she could see the white of his knuckles even from this distance. He looked every inch the Ruthless Alpha the stories described. The one who'd unified the northern clans through blood and dominance. The one no wolf dared challenge. But Avalini saw something else. Something in the rigid set of his jaw, the hollowness around his eyes, the barely perceptible tremor in that clenched hand. She saw the same thing she'd seen in her own reflection every time she'd been rejected and cast out, the look of someone broken from the inside, holding together through sheer, fragile will. The tray rattled slightly as she set it down. The sound, small as it was, cut through the silence like a blade. His head turned. Slowly. And for the first time, Alpha Thorn Varric's eyes met hers, winter gray, burning with something between fury and desperation. "Get out," he said, his voice rough as gravel, cold as the stone walls. But Avellini couldn't move. Because beneath the Alpha's command, beneath the layers of violence and dominance he wore like armor, she heard the same silent scream she'd carried for years. The scream of someone whose other half had gone silent. And despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run, despite knowing she was nothing to him and never could be, Avellini Loon took one step forward into the Alpha's chamber. "You're in pain," she whispered. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet further. Thorn rose from his chair with lethal slowness, towering over her even from across the room. "You dare speak to me?" The words were a low growl, each one edged with threat. "You dare presume to know anything about me?" "I know what it feels like," she continued, her voice barely audible but somehow steady. "To be broken. To be incomplete. To wonder if you'll ever be whole again." Something flickered across his face, shock, rage, or perhaps recognition. He took a step toward her, and Avellini knew with absolute certainty that she'd just made a terrible mistake. But she also knew, with that same strange certainty, that she couldn't walk away. Not from pain that mirrored her own. Not from the Ruthless Alpha whose wolf had been silent for 60 days. "Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin." Chapter 1. 3 weeks earlier, Avellini had stumbled through the mountain pass with frost biting at her exposed skin and hunger gnawing at her belly. The Silver Pine Pack's rejection letter was tucked inside her threadbare coat, the third such letter she'd received in 2 years. Omega status insufficient for pack integration. Recommendation: seek placement in labor settlements. Labor settlements. A polite term for places where Omegas went to die slowly, worked to the bone in mines or mills, their bodies used up and discarded. She'd seen one once, passing through the Eastern Territories. The eyes of the workers had been empty, their scents flat and lifeless. So she'd climbed higher instead, into the brutal northern peaks where Irefong Citadel crouched like a beast of stone and ice. They said Alpha Thorn Varric accepted anyone strong enough to survive the journey. They didn't say he accepted them kindly. The beta who'd processed her arrival had looked at her the way one might look at spoiled meat. He'd checked her teeth, examined her hands for signs of disease, and finally pressed a branding iron to her wrist without ceremony. The mark of service burned into her flesh, and with it, any illusions she'd harbored about finding belonging here. "Kitchens and lower halls," he'd grunted. "Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your Omega sense suppressed. The Alpha has no patience for weakness." Now, 21 days into her service, Avellini understood what he'd really meant. Irefong wasn't a pack. It was a cage dressed in hierarchy, and she was merely the latest creature pressed between its bars. She woke each morning in the servants' quarters, a drafty room where 12 other Omegas slept on thin pallets. None of them spoke to her. None of them spoke to each other, really. They moved like ghosts, performing their duties with mechanical efficiency, their eyes carefully blink. One woman, older than the rest, had scars around her throat. Avellini never asked about them. The work was endless. Scrubbing floors until her knees were raw. Hauling water from the deep wells. Washing linens that reeked of sweat and blood. The betas barely acknowledged her existence except to bark orders. The alphas looked through her as if she were made of glass. But Avellini watched. And listened. And began to understand that something was deeply, terribly wrong in Irefong. It started with the scent, or rather, the absence of it. Every wolf knew that an alpha scent was a tangible thing, a weight in the air that spoke of power and dominance. It should have permeated every stone of this fortress. Instead, there was only cold emptiness, like a hearth that had burned out weeks ago and left nothing but ash. She'd seen Alpha Thorn twice before today. Once in the Great Hall, where he'd sat motionless on his throne while the Beta Council reported on border patrols. His face had been stone, his body perfectly still, but his hands had trembled against the armrests. Just the slightest quiver, barely visible. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they simply pretended not to. The second time, she'd been scrubbing the corridor outside his chambers when he'd emerged with 2 guards. He'd walked past her without a glance, but she'd caught his scent, faint and fractured. It should have made her instincts scream submission. Instead, it made her chest ache with recognition. That was the scent of someone broken. The whispers in the servants' quarters were careful coded. The Alpha is unwell. The Alpha is cursed. The Alpha's wolf is silent. 60 days, they said. 2 full moon cycles without a shift. For a wolf, especially an Alpha, that was a death sentence waiting to be carried out. And then there was Lord Kalen. She'd first seen him 4 days ago, striding through the great hall with a contingent of warriors at his back. He was tall, powerfully built, with auburn hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. An Alpha in his own right, second only to Thorn in the pack hierarchy. He moved with the confidence of a wolf who knew his worth and intended to claim what he believed he deserved. The northern borders remain vulnerable, Kalen had announced during the evening meal, his voice carrying easily through the hall. Without proper Alpha presence, the other packs will see weakness. They'll test us. His gaze had swept across the assembled wolves before landing deliberately on Thorn's empty chair at the head table. A pack without a strong Alpha is a pack waiting to be conquered. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Others had shifted uncomfortably, but no one challenged him. How could they? He was only speaking the truth that everyone already knew. Avelini had watched from her position near the kitchens as Kalen gathered supporters around him, wolves who nodded at his words and cast uncertain glances toward the Alpha's wing. She'd seen this before, in her second pack. The circling. The careful positioning. The way power shifted like water finding cracks in stone. Lord Kalen wasn't just questioning Thorn's leadership. He was preparing to take it. And tonight, when she'd been assigned to deliver the Alpha's meal, she'd understood with sudden, terrible clarity that she was walking into the center of a storm that would tear Irefong apart. The question was whether she'd survive it. Chapter 2. The guards had warned her not to linger, but they needn't have bothered. Every instinct Avelini possessed screamed at her to leave the tray and run. Instead, she stood frozen in the antechamber, staring through the half-open door at the Alpha who'd just ordered her out. Thorn hadn't moved from his chair. He sat rigid as carved marble, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have sent her scrambling for the exit. But Avelini had spent too many years reading the subtle languages of survival, the difference between a wolf who would strike and one who was fighting not to break. And Alpha Thornvarek was fighting a losing battle. I said get out. His voice was quieter this time, but somehow more dangerous. A blade drawn slowly from its sheath. She should have obeyed. Should have bowed her head and backed away and forgotten she'd ever seen the great Alpha in such a state. But her feet wouldn't move. Because she'd seen that look before, reflected in still water and broken glass. The look of someone whose other half had gone silent, leaving only terrible, echoing emptiness. Forgive me, Alpha. The words came out barely above a whisper. But I know. You know nothing. He rose from the chair in one fluid motion, and suddenly the distance between them felt like nothing at all. He was massive up close, all brutal angles and coiled strength wrapped in furs and fury. You're a servant. An Omega. You don't speak to me. You don't look at me. You certainly don't presume to understand anything about me. But his hands were shaking. Not much, just enough that she could see the tremor when he gestured sharply toward the door. And his scent, fractured and faint as it was, carried notes of something she recognized intimately: desperation. How long, she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. What? How long has your wolf been silent? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thorn moved toward her with predatory precision, closing the distance until she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. This close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the harsh lines bracketing his mouth, the way his jaw clenched as if he were physically holding himself together. "Who told you?" Each word was clipped, controlled. "Was it Kaelin? One of the betas?" "No one told me." Avelini's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't step back. "I can feel it. The absence. Like a hearth that's gone cold." Something flickered across his face, shock, perhaps, or recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "You feel nothing. You are nothing." A packless Omega with delusions of significance. He leaned closer, using his size to intimidate, to remind her of exactly how fragile she was compared to him. "Get out of my sight before I have you thrown from the Citadel walls." It should have worked. He was terrifying like this, all barely leashed violence and alpha dominance. But Avelini had been thrown out of 3 packs, had survived beatings and starvation, and the kind of rejection that hollowed a person out from the inside. She'd learned to recognize the difference between wolves who wanted to hurt her and wolves who wanted to hurt themselves. Thorn Varric was destroying himself one silent day at a time. 60 days, she said softly. "That's what they're saying. 60 days without your wolf." His hand shot out and gripped her throat. Not choking, not quite, but firm enough to lift her slightly onto her toes. His eyes had gone winter cold, and for a heartbeat, Avelini thought she'd finally pushed too far. "Say that again," he growled, "and it will be the last thing you ever say." But his hand was shaking against her skin. And this close, she could hear the ragged edge to his breathing, could see the hairline fractures in his control. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to make her afraid enough to leave before she saw him shatter completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it. Not sorry for speaking, but sorry for the pain she could feel radiating from him in waves. Sorry that he was alone in this vast, cold chamber with no one to witness his breaking except a worthless Omega he could barely stand to look at. His grip loosened slightly. "You're sorry." He laughed, sharp and bitter. "You pity me." An Omega, he released her suddenly, stepping back as if she'd burned him. "Get out. Now." But Avelini didn't move. Because in that moment of contact, skin against skin, she'd felt something. A pull, deep in her chest. A warmth that spread through her bones and made her wolf stir for the first time in days. Her wolf, usually so quiet and submissive, had lifted its head and recognized something in him. Something broken that called to her own brokenness. "Please," she heard herself say, her hand rising of its own accord. "Let me help." Help. The word was razor-edged. "You think you can help me? You, who can barely help yourself." He turned away sharply, dismissing her. "Leave the tray and go. If I see you near my chambers again, I'll have you branded as a trespasser and sold to the labor settlements. That's the only help someone like you can offer, staying far away from me." The words should have cut. Should have sent her running. But all Avelini could focus on was the way his shoulders hunched slightly when he thought she couldn't see, the way his hand went to his chest, as if trying to find something that was no longer there. She took a step forward. Then another. "Don't," Thorn said without turning around. A warning and a plea wrapped together. But the pull was stronger now, insistent. Her Omega instincts, usually so focused on survival and submission, were screaming something entirely different. Not run. Not hide. Sue. Heal. Complete. Her hand touched his arm, gentle as snowfall. Thorn spun to face her, fury and panic warring in his expression. "What do you think you're?" Avelini rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. The world exploded into golden light. Chapter 3. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but warmth. Avelini felt it surge through her like sunlight breaking through winter clouds, pouring from her into Thorn and back again in a circuit that made her gasp against his lips. It was brilliant and terrifying and impossibly right, as if some fundamental piece of the universe had just clicked into place. Then Thorn jerked away from her with a strangled sound, and the warmth became fire. golden light erupted between them, crackling like lightning along his skin. Avelini stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth, as Thorn staggered and grabbed the edge of his chair for support. The light intensified, wrapping around him in tendrils of pure energy that seemed to sink into his chest, his shoulders, his spine. "No," he gasped, his voice raw with shock and something that might have been hope if hope didn't sound so much like terror. "No, it's not, I can't." His words cut off in a roar that shook the stones of the chamber. Not a human sound. Not entirely. It was the cry of a wolf that had been caged for too long, and the prison walls were finally cracking apart. Avelini watched in frozen horror as Thorn fell to his knees, his body convulsing. The furs slipped from his shoulders. His hands clawed at the floor, and she saw his fingers begin to elongate, bones shifting beneath skin. The golden light pulsed brighter with each shuddering breath, and beneath it, she could feel something vast and primal clawing its way to the surface. His wolf. After 60 days of silence, his wolf was coming back. But it wasn't a gentle awakening. This was violent, desperate, like a drowning man breaking the surface and dragging down everything within reach. "Alpha." She took a step toward him without thinking, but he threw out a hand to stop her. "Stay back," he snarled, and his voice was layered now, human and wolf tangled together in a way that raised every hair on the back of her neck. Don't come near me." The golden energy flared again, so bright she had to shield her eyes. When she lowered her hand, Thorn was on all fours, his body caught in that terrible in-between state. His bones were reshaping, beginning to ripple across his skin in dark waves. His eyes, when they met hers, had gone completely feral, wolf gold bleeding through the gray. And in those eyes, she saw hunger. Recognition. Claim. The word echoed through her mind like a bell, though he hadn't spoken it aloud. Her Omega instincts, which had been strangely calm during the kiss, now screamed at her to run. This wasn't the broken alpha she'd pitied. This was a predator that had been starved and was finally free. Thorn fought it. She could see him struggling, his human consciousness trying to claw back control even as his wolf surged forward. The shift stuttered, reversed partially, then slammed forward again. He threw his head back and roared once more, and this time the sound shattered the windows. Glass exploded inward, bringing a blast of freezing air. The golden light pulsed one final time and then vanished, leaving only the harsh glow of moonlight. Thorn collapsed forward, his body still half-shifted, breathing in great heaving gasps. Fur covered his arms and back, claws had emerged from his fingertips, and when he lifted his head, his face was caught somewhere between man and beast. But he was still in control. Barely. "What did you do?" The words came out distorted, forced through a jaw that wasn't quite human anymore. "What did you do to me?" "I don't know," Avelini whispered, pressing herself against the wall. I wanted to help." "Help?" He was on his feet in an instant, moving with inhuman speed. One moment he was across the room, the next he was looming over her, one clawed hand braced against the wall beside her head. "You broke something. You woke," his voice cracked. "My wolf. After 60 days, my wolf is." He stopped, his eyes widening as if he'd just realized what he'd said aloud. Then something else flickered across his face. Understanding. Horror. "Mate," he breathed, and the word sounded like a curse. The golden light sparked again between them, fainter now but unmistakable. Avelini felt it in her bones, in her blood, in the very core of her being. The mate bond. Not just recognition, but activation. Her kiss had done more than wake his wolf. It had bound them together in a way that couldn't be undone. "No." Thorn shoved away from her violently, stumbling back. "No. Not you. Not a Packless Omega. Not." He looked down at his clawed hands, at the fur still rippling along his arms. His wolf was too close to the surface, too wild, and she could see him fighting to push it back down. But the wolf didn't want to go back. It wanted her. Thorn's control visibly frayed. He turned toward her again, and this time there was nothing human in his eyes at all. Just pure, feral instinct. His body tensed, preparing to lunge, to claim, to complete what the mate bond had started. Guards. The word tore from his throat in a roar that was equal parts command and desperation. Guards. The doors burst open. For warriors poured in, weapons drawn, and stopped dead at the sight of their alpha half-shifted and radiating power that made the air itself feel heavy. Take her, Thorn ordered, not looking at them, his eyes still locked on Avalini. Lock her in the eastern tower. Post 6 guards. No one goes near her. No one speaks to her. His claws dug into his palms, drawing blood. If I see her again before I have control, I'll kill her. Or worse. The guards moved toward Avalini cautiously. She didn't resist as they gripped her arms, didn't protest as they pulled her toward the door. She couldn't look away from Thorn, from the way he stood trembling in the ruins of his chamber, caught between human shame and wolf need. I'm sorry, she whispered one last time. Thorn's response was another roar, this one pure anguish, as the guards dragged her away and the doors slammed shut behind them. In the sudden silence, Avalini could still feel the golden thread of the mate bond stretching between them, binding her to the ruthless alpha whose wolf she'd awakened. And she knew with absolute certainty that neither of them would ever be the same. Chapter 4. The eastern tower room was larger than the servants' quarters, with an actual bed and a window that overlooked the mountain peaks. It should have felt like an improvement. Instead, it felt like a cage with better furnishings. Avalini had been locked inside for 3 days when the pack doctor finally came. He was an older beta named Corwin, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. He examined her without speaking, checking her pulse, her eyes, drawing blood that he studied with careful attention. Through it all, 6 guards stood outside the door, and Avalini could feel their tension like a living thing. They were afraid. Not of her. Of what she represented. The bond is active, Corwin said finally, his voice clinically neutral. Fully formed. I've never seen one manifest so quickly or so completely. He packed his instruments with precise movements. Your scent has already begun to shift. In another week, you'll carry his mark even without a formal claiming. Avalini wrapped her arms around herself. Can it be broken? No. The single word fell like a stone. Mate bonds, once activated, are permanent. The alpha could reject you, refuse to complete the bond, but the connection itself. He shook his head. That would require both your deaths. She'd expected as much, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a door slamming shut. How is he? Corwin's expression flickered, something almost like pity crossing his features. Physically? Restored. His wolf is back, strong as it ever was. But mentally. He paused, choosing his words carefully. 60 days of dormancy, then a sudden, violent awakening. The alpha's wolf is unstable. Feral. It spent 2 months in silence, and now it's trying to make up for lost time. His gaze met hers directly. It wants you. Desperately. And Alpha Thorn is using every ounce of control he possesses to keep it caged. So I'm not a prisoner, Avalini said quietly. I'm a temptation he's trying to resist. You're both. Corwin moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, you saved his life. The dormancy was killing him, slowly but surely. Whatever you did broke the curse. He glanced back at her. He'll hate you for it anyway. After he left, the silence pressed in. Avalini moved to the window and stared out at the mountains, feeling the golden thread of the bond stretching between her and Thorn like a leash she couldn't see but couldn't escape. She could sense him, distant but present. His rage. His confusion. The feral hunger of his wolf battering against his control. And underneath it all, that terrible, aching emptiness she'd recognized in him from the start. The bond hadn't filled it. If anything, it had made it worse, because now he had something to lose again. The door burst open on the 4th day, but it wasn't Corwin who entered. It was Thorn himself, flanked by guards who looked ready to restrain their own alpha if necessary. He'd regained control of his form, fully human again, but the wildness still lingered in his eyes. He stood in the doorway as if crossing the threshold would break something fundamental inside him. "The bond is real," he said without preamble. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. Corwin confirmed it. "The entire pack knows by now." Avellini stood slowly, her heart hammering. "I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant." Each word was clipped, precise. "What matters is what you've done. You've bound yourself to me. Made yourself my weakness. My mate." He spat the word like poison. A packless Omega who couldn't even hold a place in Silverpine now claims to be the mate of the Irefong Alpha. The contempt in his voice should have hurt more than it did. But Avellini had been rejected too many times to let his words cut deep. "I claim nothing, Alpha. I didn't choose this any more than you did." "No?" He took one step into the room, and she saw his hands clench into fists. "Then why did you kiss me? Why did you reach out when I told you to leave?" "Because you were in pain," she said simply. "And I couldn't walk away from it." Something flickered across his face, too fast to identify. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "Your misplaced empathy has cost us both everything. I cannot acknowledge you publicly. Do you understand? The pack would never accept an Omega mate. Kaylin would use it to destroy everything I've built. Then reject me." The words came out steadier than she felt. "Break the bond." "I can't." The admission seemed to tear something from him. "My wolf won't allow it. It's already claimed you. If I try to send you away, it will break free and drag you back, and I won't be able to stop it." His jaw clenched. "So you stay here. In this room. Close enough that my wolf can sense you, but far enough that I don't have to see you. That's the arrangement." "I'm not a pet to be kennelled," Avellini said, finding her spine. "I'm your mate. You're nothing." The words exploded from him, and for a moment she saw the feral gold flash in his eyes. "You're a mistake. An accident. A weakness I can't afford and can't escape." He backed toward the door. "Stay in this room. Don't test me. And pray that Kaylin doesn't discover exactly what you are before I figure out how to manage this disaster." He was gone before she could respond, the door slamming shut with devastating finality. But Avellini could still feel him through the bond, pacing somewhere in the citadel like a caged wolf, his fury barely masking the desperate need underneath. And she knew, with grim certainty, that Thorn's carefully maintained control was already beginning to fracture. The explosion came 2 days later in the form of Lord Kaylin's voice echoing through the Great Hall, loud enough that even Avellini could hear it from her tower prison. "I demand an audience with the Alpha. I demand an explanation for his unseemly obsession with the packless Omega servant. I demand to know why the mate of an Alpha is locked away like a shameful secret." Through the bond, Avellini felt Thorn's rage spike, wild and barely contained. The storm she'd started was about to break over all of them. Chapter 5. Thorn came for her in the middle of the night, and Avellini knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. He stood in her doorway breathing hard, his eyes flickering between human gray and feral gold. His shirt was torn, hanging open to reveal deep scratches across his chest that were healing even as she watched. Blood stained his knuckles, and the energy radiating from him was pure, barely contained violence. "Come with me," he growled. "Now." The guards made no move to stop him. They looked relieved when Avellini rose and followed without protest, though they fell into formation behind them as Thorn led her through dark corridors to his private chambers. The room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, claw marks gouged deep into the walls, the windows shattered again. In the center of it all, Thorn paced like the wolf he was fighting not to become. "Alpha, what happened?" Kaylin pushed too far, he bit out, his voice strained. "Made his demands in front of the entire council. Questioned my fitness to lead. Called you a distraction I couldn't control." His hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. "I nearly killed him. Would have if the Beta Council hadn't intervened." Avellini could see it in the tremor running through his massive frame, in the way his breath came too fast, too shallow. His wolf was surging against his control, triggered by the confrontation, by Kalen's challenge to his authority and his mate. "Your wolf is trying to break free," she said quietly. "It's been trying for 3 days." Thorn stopped pacing long enough to look at her, and the desperation in his eyes stole her breath. "Since I locked you away. Since I put distance between us." His jaw clenched. "My wolf won't accept it. It thinks I've rejected our mate, and it's trying to force a shift so it can claim you itself." "Then why did you bring me here?" "Because you're the only thing that helps." The admission seemed to tear from him. "When you're near, when I consent you, feel you through the bond, the feral edge dulls. Not completely, but enough that I can think. Enough that I can maintain control." He laughed, bitter and sharp. The great alpha thorn, brought low by his need for a packless omega. Avellini moved closer, drawn by something deeper than logic. Through the bond, she could feel his wolf's rage, its desperate hunger, but underneath that was the same pain she'd recognized from the beginning. The wound that had never healed. "Let me help you," she said, the same words she'd spoken before kissing him. This time, he didn't order her away. "How?" The single word was raw. "How can you help with this?" She didn't know. Didn't understand the instinct that made her reach for him, placing her palm against his chest where his heart hammered too fast. But the moment she touched him, something shifted. The golden light flickered between them again, softer this time. Not the explosive burst of their first contact, but a gentle, steady glow. And with it came a warmth that spread through her and into him, carrying a calm she hadn't known she possessed. Thorn's breathing slowed. The wild flickering in his eyes steadied. His wolf, which had been clawing at the surface, eased back with something that felt almost like contentment. "What?" He stared down at where her hand rested against his skin. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," Avellini admitted. But she could feel it now, this gift she'd never recognized. Her omega nature wasn't just submission and weakness. It was balance. Stability. A grounding force that could soothe even the most feral alpha mind. Thorn's hand came up to cover hers, holding it in place as if afraid she'd pull away. For a long moment, they stood like that in the ruined chamber, connected by touch and bond and something neither of them fully understood. "It should have been anyone but you," he said finally, his voice rough but no longer strained. "Any strong omega from a powerful pack. Someone worthy of being an alpha's mate." His gray eyes met hers. "Instead, it's a rejected outcast who makes my wolf purr like it's never known peace." "Why did your wolf go silent?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. 60 days, Thorn." "What happened?" His expression shuddered immediately. "That's none of your concern. I'm your mate." "It's exactly my concern." "You're a convenient anchor," he corrected coldly. But his hand still covered hers, and through the bond she could feel the lie beneath his words. "Tell me," she pressed. "Please. I need to understand." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then something in him seemed to break, and the words came out hard and sharp as broken glass. "My brother," he said. 61 days ago, my brother challenged me for the alpha title. Said I was too ruthless, too cold. That my rule would destroy Irefong. His jaw worked. So I fought him. Defeated him. And when pack law demanded I either exile or execute him, I chose execution. Because that's what a strong alpha does. He doesn't let sentiment cloud his judgment. Avellini's breath caught. "You killed your own brother." "I did what was necessary." But his voice cracked on the words. "I watched him die, and I felt nothing. Nothing. And my wolf," he stopped, swallowing hard. "My wolf retreated. Wouldn't answer my call. Wouldn't even acknowledge me. As if killing Kieran killed something in both of us." Understanding crashed over her like a wave. "Your wolf didn't go silent because of a curse. It went silent because you broke your own heart." "Alphas don't have hearts," Thorn said automatically. But the words rang hollow. "They have duty. Responsibility. The strength to make impossible choices." and the burden of living with them. Avellini's other hand came up to cup his face, making him look at her. You're not heartless, Thorn. You're devastated. And your ruthlessness isn't strength, it's armor. A shield you wear so no one can see how much it cost you. For a heartbeat, his expression was completely open, raw with grief and guilt and a desperate need for someone to tell him he wasn't the monster he believed himself to be. Then the walls slammed back into place. Don't romanticize this, he said harshly, though he didn't pull away from her touch. Don't make me into something I'm not. I am ruthless. I am cold. And I will continue to be, because that's what keeps Irefong strong. Then let me be your balance, Avellini said softly. Let me carry what you can't. Thorn stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring in his eyes. Then, slowly, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers, the gesture almost unbearably intimate. You're going to destroy me, he whispered. Piece by piece. Or save you, she countered. Depends on how you look at it. His laugh was quiet, bitter, but his wolf had finally gone still, soothed by her presence and her words, and the steady warmth of her stabilizing touch. Outside, dawn was breaking over Irefong, and Lord Kalen was planning his next move. Chapter 6. 3 days after their moment of vulnerability, Thorn summoned Avellini to his study. Not his destroyed chambers, but the formal room where he conducted pack business, all dark wood and cold efficiency. He sat behind his desk like it was a barrier between them, every inch the Ruthless Alpha once more. I've drafted an arrangement, he said without preamble, sliding a document across the polished surface. Terms that will satisfy pack law and allow us both to survive this bond with minimal disruption. Avellini didn't reach for the paper. An arrangement. You'll be given a suite in the main citadel. A stipend. Protection from Kalen and any others who might see you as a weakness to exploit. His tone was businesslike, detached. In exchange, you'll make yourself available when my wolf requires stabilization. Discreetly. Without drawing attention or making demands. A kept secret, she said flatly. A practical solution. He met her eyes, his expression carefully neutral. You'll have safety and comfort. I'll have the stability I need to maintain control. It's more than most matings offer. Most matings involve claiming, marking, public acknowledgement. This isn't most matings. Something sharp flashed in his eyes. You're an Omega without status, without pack, without value beyond what you provide to my wolf. I'm offering you far more than you deserve. The words should have hurt. A week ago, they would have. But Avellini had spent 3 days feeling his grief through their bond, watching him maintain his ruthless facade while his wolf yearned for connection. She'd seen past the armor, and she couldn't unsee it now. No, she said quietly. Thorn's expression darkened. Excuse me? No. I won't accept your arrangement. She stood, placing her palms on his desk and leaning forward. I won't be your dirty secret, your convenient tool, your shame hidden away in pretty rooms. You don't have a choice. I have the only choice that matters. Her voice was steady despite the way her heart hammered. You can claim me properly, mark me, acknowledge me before the pack, accept what we are, or you can reject me completely. Send me away. Break whatever bond you can and let me leave Irefong. My wolf won't allow. Then that's your problem, not mine. She straightened, finding strength in her own words. I've been rejected by 3 packs, Thorn. I've been told I'm worthless, weak, undeserving of belonging. And I believed it. I let their rejection define me. Her eyes met his, unflinching. But I won't let you do the same. I won't let you use me while being ashamed of me. I'm worth more than that. For a moment, shock flickered across his face. Then fury. You presume to make demands of me? To dictate terms to an alpha? I presume to demand basic dignity, she shot back. You opened yourself to me. Showed me your pain, your guilt over Kieran. Let me see the male beneath the monster. Her voice softened slightly. Don't punish me for that by treating me like I'm nothing. Thorn rose slowly, his presence filling the room. You think you know me because of one vulnerable moment? You think that changes what this is? I think you're terrified, Avellini said, and watched him go still. Not of Kaelin. Not of losing control. You're terrified that if you acknowledge me, if you let yourself care about something again, it might destroy you the way Karen's death did. Enough. The word cracked like a whip. It's not enough. Not anymore. She held her ground even as power rolled off him in waves. Claim me or reject me, Thorn. But don't ask me to live in the space between. I won't do it. They stared at each other across the desk, the bond humming with tension and unspoken words. Thorn's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of his desk hard enough that the wood creaked. You have no idea what you're asking, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. If I claim you publicly, Kaelin will use it. He'll challenge me. Force a trial by combat. And if I'm fighting for my title while trying to protect you, then don't protect me, Avellini interrupted. Fight for yourself. For Irefong. And trust that I can stand on my own. You're an Omega. I'm your Omega. The words rang with certainty. And I'm stronger than you think. Before Thorn could respond, the study doors burst open. A beta guard stumbled in, his face pale. Alpha. Lord Kaelin is in the Great Hall. He's calling you out. In front of the entire pack. Thorn's expression went glacial. Tell him I'll address his concerns in due course. Alpha, he's demanding trial by combat. The guard swallowed hard. He's invoked the ancient right. Says you're unfit to lead, compromised by an Omega mate you refuse to claim. He's challenging for the Alpha title. Through the bond, Avellini felt Thorn's fury spike so sharply it made her gasp. But his face remained stone as he moved around the desk with lethal grace. Stay here, he ordered her. Don't leave this room. Thorn. That's an Alpha command. He stopped at the door, his back rigid. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Then he was gone, striding toward the great hall where Kaelin waited. Avellini stood frozen for 3 heartbeats before following. She'd spent her whole life obeying Alpha commands, accepting rejection, staying silent. Not anymore. She reached the great hall to find it packed with wolves. They'd formed a circle around the center where Thorn stood facing Kaelin, who looked triumphant. There you are, Kaelin called out, his voice carrying. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve along with your judgment. He gestured broadly to the assembled pack. I, Lord Kaelin of Irefong, formally challenge Alpha Thorn Varric for leadership of this pack. I claim he is unfit to rule, compromised by an unmated bond, weakened by sentiment, unable to put pack before personal desire. You're making a mistake, Thorn said, his voice deadly calm. Am I? Kaelin smiled coldly. Then prove it. Accept my challenge. Fight me under the old laws. He paused for effect. And to make it interesting, when I win, I claim the Omega as my prize. A fitting reward for cleaning up your mess. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Through the bond, Avellini felt Thorn's control splinter, felt his wolf surge forward with murderous intent. You will not touch her, Thorn snarled, and there was nothing human in the sound. Kaelin's smile widened. Then I guess you'd better not lose. He spread his arms in challenge. What say you, Alpha? Do you accept? Or do you prove my point by backing down? The silence that followed was absolute. Thorn's eyes found Avellini in the crowd, and in them she saw fury, fear, and a desperate kind of resolve. I accept, he said. Trial by combat. 3 days hence, under the full moon. His gaze never left hers. And when I win, the Omega will be claimed and marked before this entire pack. The hall exploded into chaos, but Avellini heard only one thing, the promise in Thorn's words, and the terror underneath them that this time, when he fought, he might have too much to lose. Chapter 7. The full moon rose blood-red over Irefong Citadel, casting long shadows across the combat arena. Avellini stood at the edge of the circle carved into stone, surrounded by hundreds of wolves who'd gathered to witness their alpha fight for his title. And for her, she could feel Thorn through the bond, somewhere in the preparation chambers below. His wolf was already surging, restless and violent, feeding on the challenge and the threat to their mate. But underneath that primal rage was something colder: calculation. Fear. The knowledge that Kaelin had chosen his tactics perfectly. "You shouldn't be here," Mira whispered beside her. The kitchen worker had sought her out that morning, offering unexpected solidarity. "If Kaelin wins." "He won't." Avalini's voice was steadier than she felt. "He can't." But she'd seen the way Thorn had avoided her these past 3 days. Training alone, pushing his body and his wolf to their limits, refusing to let her near enough to stabilize him. Pride and strategy warring with need. If he relied on her touch to maintain control during the fight, Kaelin would exploit that weakness without mercy. So Thorn was facing this alone, just as he'd faced everything alone since Kieran's death. The drums began to beat, deep and rhythmic. The crowd fell silent. Lord Kaelin entered first, striding into the arena with confident grace. He'd stripped to the waist, his muscular frame on display, and the wolves who supported him cheered. He was powerful, experienced, and most dangerous of all. He had nothing to lose. No guilt weighing him down, no grief fracturing his control. "Come then, Broken Alpha," Kaelin called out, his voice carrying across the arena. "Show us if you're still worthy to lead." Thorn emerged from the opposite entrance, and Avalini's breath caught. He looked every inch the ruthless warrior, dark hair pulled back, body coiled with lethal power, eyes burning with cold fury. But she could feel the truth through their bond. His wolf was already too close to the surface, agitated by 3 days of forced separation from her, driven wild by the threat Kaelin posed. Their eyes met across the arena. For one heartbeat, his expression softened. Then he looked away, and the mask of the Alpha slammed back into place. The pack elder raised his hand. "By ancient right and wolf law, this trial by combat shall determine leadership of Irefong. The challenge is to first blood, first submission, or death." His voice rang out. "Let the trial begin." Thorn and Kaelin circled each other, both still in human form. This was the old way: fight as men first, shift only when necessary. It tested control as much as strength. Kaelin struck first, a brutal combination that Thorn blocked easily. They traded blows, testing defenses, and the crowd roared with each impact. But Avalini could see what others might miss: the slight hesitation in Thorn's movements, the way his breathing was already too fast. 60 days, Kaelin said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. 60 days you cowered in your chambers while your wolf abandoned you. What kind of alpha loses his other half? Thorn's response was a vicious strike that opened a cut on Kaelin's cheek. But his eyes flickered gold for just a moment, his wolf responding to the taunt with rage. There it is, Kaelin laughed, wiping blood from his face. The feral beast you're barely holding back. Tell me, Alpha, does your Omega know what you really are? A broken wolf held together by a packless reject. Shut your mouth. Thorn's voice had gone rough, layered with his wolf. Why? Because it's true. Kaelin pressed forward with renewed aggression. You needed her to wake your wolf. Pathetic. You need her to keep it stable. Weakness. He landed a solid blow to Thorn's ribs. And when I win, I'll show her what a real alpha can do. Maybe she'll prefer a wolf who doesn't treat her like a shameful secret. Thorn's control cracked. He shifted partially, claws erupting, and slashed at Kaelin with inhuman speed. Kaelin barely dodged, and the crowd's roar intensified. That's it, Kaelin goaded, circling. Lose control. Show them all that you're not fit to lead. That the great Thornvarric is just a feral beast who killed his own brother and lost his mind over an Omega. Don't speak of him. Thorn lunged, fully giving in to his wolf's rage. It was exactly what Kaelin wanted. The fight devolved into brutal savagery, both wolves now shifting between forms. Kaelin was skilled, experienced, using Thorn's emotional instability against him. Every mention of Kieran, every insult toward Avalini, pushed Thorn further toward the edge. Through the bond, Avalini felt the moment Thorn's control began to shatter completely. His wolf wasn't fighting to win anymore. It was fighting to destroy to tear Kaelin apart for threatening their mate, and Thorn's human consciousness was drowning under the feral tide. "You're nothing," Kaelin shouted, landing a crushing blow that sent Thorn staggering. A cursed alpha with a shameful mate. "When I win, I'll throw her to the pack and let them decide if she's worth keeping." Thorn's roar shook the very stones of the arena. He shifted fully, but it wasn't the controlled transformation of a stable alpha. This was the wild, violent eruption of a wolf that had broken free of all restraint. Golden light crackled across his massive form, but it was chaotic, burning too bright. The thorn wolf that emerged was enormous, black-furred and terrifying, but his eyes held no recognition. No strategy. Only blind, feral madness that saw everything as a threat to be eliminated. Kaelin shifted quickly, but even in wolf form, his satisfaction was evident. He'd done it. He'd pushed Thorn past reason, past control, into the very instability he'd accused him of. A feral alpha was no alpha at all. Thorn lunged with devastating force, but his movements were uncoordinated, driven by rage rather than skill. Kaelin dodged and struck back, using Thorn's madness against him. Blood flew. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps of shock. Through the bond, Avellini felt Thorn slipping away completely, felt his human consciousness being devoured by his wolf's feral need. He was losing. Not the fight, he was still stronger, still more powerful, but himself. And a mindless, feral alpha was as good as dead. Kaelin circled the raging thornwolf, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the killing blow that pack law would see as justified. Necessary. Merciful. Avellini's hands clenched into fists. She'd promised not to interfere. Promised Thorn could fight this battle alone. But watching him tear himself apart, watching him drown in the same grief and rage that had silenced his wolf in the first place. She couldn't. She wouldn't. Avellini broke from the crowd and ran toward the arena, ignoring Myra's cry of warning, ignoring the shocked gasps of the pack. The guards reached for her, but she was already through, already crossing the blood-stained stone toward the two massive wolves locked in combat. Toward the alpha who was losing himself completely. Toward the mate who needed her, whether he'd admit it or not. Chapter 8. The arena erupted in chaos as Avellini ran toward the fighting wolves. Voices shouted warnings, commands to stop her, but she didn't slow. The bond burned in her chest like a living flame, guiding her straight toward Thorn's feral form. Kaelin saw her first. His wolf eyes gleamed with triumph as he positioned himself for a killing strike, using Thorn's distraction against him. The feral thornwolf was too far gone to recognize strategy, snapping and lunging with blind rage. Avellini threw herself between them. Time seemed to slow. She felt Kaelin's shock, the crowd's collective gasp, and through the bond, Thorn's consciousness suddenly surging through the feral haze with pure, terrified recognition. The massive black wolf pulled his strike at the last possible second, his claws stopping inches from her face. For a heartbeat, his golden eyes met hers, and she saw him in there, drowning, desperate, lost. "I'm here," she said, her voice cutting through the bloodlust and chaos. "Come back to me." Then she did what instinct had been screaming at her to do since the moment his wolf broke free. She opened herself completely, dropping every wall she'd ever built, and let her Omega power pour out. The golden light erupted from her in a wave that crashed through the arena like dawn breaking over mountains. It wasn't explosive like their first kiss, wasn't desperate like the night in his chambers. This was controlled, purposeful, powerful. Her stabilizing aura flooded outward, washing over Thorn's feral wolf with waves of calm, of balance, of home. The effect was immediate. The chaotic energy crackling around Thorn's wolf form began to steady, the wild gold of his eyes clearing to focused amber. His massive body shuddered as her power sank into him, grounding the feral madness, anchoring his consciousness back to his wolf. Through the bond, Avellini felt the moment his human mind and wolf nature clicked into perfect alignment. Not fighting each other. Not one drowning the other. United. Whole. Complete. The thorn wolf that rose to his full height was magnificent. Still enormous, still powerful, but now moving with lethal precision instead of blind rage. His eyes locked onto Kaelin with predatory intelligence, and the challenger took an involuntary step back. No, Kaelin snarled, shifting his stance to attack. This is cheating. The Omega interfered. He didn't get to finish. Thorn moved with devastating speed, a blur of black fur and controlled fury. The fight that followed lasted less than a minute. Where before he'd been wild and uncoordinated, now every strike was calculated, perfect. Kaelin was skilled, but he stood no chance against an alpha in complete control of his power. Thorn's jaws closed around Kaelin's throat, not killing, but dominant. A submission hold that left no room for doubt. The challenger's wolf went limp, recognizing defeat. The arena fell silent. Thorn held the position for 3 long heartbeats, making his victory absolute, before releasing Kaelin and shifting back to human form. He stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard, covered in blood and dust and sweat, magnificent and terrible in his power. His eyes found Avelini immediately. She stood frozen, her golden aura still shimmering faintly around her, as the pack watched in stunned silence. Thorn crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. No hesitation. No walls. His hand cupped the back of her neck, tilting her head to expose her throat, and Avelini's breath caught as she understood what was about to happen. Alpha, she started. Mine, he growled and sank his teeth into the junction of her neck and shoulder. The claiming bite was primal, possessive, and absolutely public. Pain flared bright, and then transformed into something else entirely, a rush of connection so intense it drove the air from her lungs. The mate bond, already active, locked into place with finality. Golden light exploded between them again, visible to every wolf present, sealing what could never be undone. Thorn's mark burned itself into her skin, a brand more permanent than any iron. When he pulled back, blood stained his lips and his eyes blazed with fierce satisfaction. "This is Avelini Loon," he announced, his voice carrying across the arena with alpha command. "My mate. My equal. My queen." He turned to face the assembled pack, one arm wrapped possessively around her waist, holding her against his side. "Any wolf who questions her place questions me. Any wolf who disrespects her faces my challenge. She is Irefong, now and always." The silence stretched for a moment that felt eternal. Then, one by one, the wolves began to lower their heads in submission. Not to him alone, but to both of them. The Beta Council knelt. Even Kaelin, bleeding and defeated, bowed his head in acknowledgement. Mira was crying, Avelini realized distantly. Crying and smiling and clasping her hands together like she'd just witnessed something impossible. Through the bond, Avelini felt Thorn's emotions raw and overwhelming. Relief. Pride. Fear. Love that he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. And underneath it all, gratitude so profound it made her own eyes burn with tears. "You came for me," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Even after I tried to keep you away." "Always," she whispered back. "That's what mates do." His arm tightened around her. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not." She turned to look up at him, seeing past the blood and the alpha dominance to the male who'd been broken and was finally allowing himself to heal. "But you're stuck with me anyway." Something that might have been a laugh rumbled through his chest. Then he lowered his head and kissed her, claiming her mouth as thoroughly as he'd claimed her throat, while the pack roared their approval. When they finally broke apart, Thorn pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture achingly intimate despite the hundreds of witnesses. "My Omega," he murmured. "My balance. My strength. My alpha," Avelini replied, her hand coming up to rest over his heart. "My mate. My home." The golden light pulsed between them one more time, gentle now steady. The ruthless Alpha and his rejected Omega, broken pieces that had somehow made each other whole. Irefong had witnessed the impossible, and the legend of Alpha Thorn Varric and his stabilizing queen had just begun. Chapter 9. Lord Kalen knelt in the center of the great hall, stripped of his weapons and his rank. Dawn light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the assembled pack as Thorn pronounced judgment. By right of combat and pack law, I could take your life, Thorn said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Avalini stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a touch that grounded him, steadied the alpha power radiating from him. But exile serves better. You challenged me because you believed I was weak. Let the other territories judge whether the wolf I defeated so easily deserves their shelter. Kalen's jaw clenched, but he didn't protest. Couldn't. The mark of defeat was written in every line of his body. You have until sunset to leave Irefong lands, Thorn continued. If you're found within our borders after that, the sentence becomes death. Do you understand? Yes, Alpha. The words were bitter ash, but Kalen spoke them. As guards escorted him out, the Beta Council stepped forward, and Avalini felt the shift in the room's energy. These were the wolves who'd served under Thorn for years, who'd watched him rule with ruthless efficiency, who'd whispered about his 60 days of weakness. Now they bowed to her as deeply as they bowed to him. Queen Avalini, the eldest Beta said, and the title sent a shiver down her spine. We ask your blessing on the pack. Your power, what you did in the arena, we've never seen an Omega gift like that. It's not just power, another added, a female Beta with scars on her arms. It's balance. The Alpha has always been strong, but alone. Now, she glanced at Thorn. Now he's complete. Avalini looked to Thorn, unsure how to respond, but he squeezed her hand gently. Permission. Encouragement. I'm still learning what I can do, she said honestly. But I promise to use whatever gift I have to serve Irefong. To stabilize what's chaotic, heal what's broken, and strengthen what's already strong. The Betas exchanged glances, something like hope flickering across their faces. They'd lived under Thorn's ruthless rule long enough to recognize that something fundamental had shifted. Not weakness. Evolution. Over the following weeks, Avalini began to understand the scope of what she'd inherited. As queen, she wasn't merely Thorn's mate. She was the pack's emotional anchor. Wolves who would never dare approach the Alpha came to her with disputes, with fears, with the kind of vulnerability that Thorn's dominance had always suppressed. She mediated conflicts in the lower ranks, her stabilizing presence making it possible for hot-headed Alphas to negotiate rather than fight. She worked with Corwin to develop healing protocols that utilized her unique energy, discovering she could accelerate wolf healing when she focused her aura. She even began training other Omegas, showing them that their nature wasn't weakness, but a different kind of strength. And, through it all, Thorn watched with something that looked like wonder. I was wrong, he told her one night in their chambers, no longer his alone, but theirs. They stood by the window overlooking the mountains, his arms wrapped around her from behind, her back against his chest. About strength. About power. About what makes an Alpha worthy to rule. You weren't entirely wrong, Avalini said, lacing her fingers through his. Irefong needed your ruthlessness. Your dominance. The Northern Territories respect strength. But strength without balance is just brutality, Thorn countered. His lips brushed her temple. I ruled through fear and force. Kept the pack together by making them more afraid of me than of any external threat. It worked, but it was. He paused, searching for words. Unsustainable. I was burning myself out, and I didn't even realize it until my wolf couldn't take it anymore and went silent. You were grieving, Avalini said softly. Carrying guilt you couldn't process. I killed my brother. The words came easier now, though they still carried weight. That doesn't change just because I had reasons. But you, his arms tightened around her. You showed me that carrying that guilt alone was destroying me. That ruthlessness isn't the same as strength. That real power comes from balance. Avalini turned in his arms to face him. We balance each other. Your dominance gives the pack security and direction. My empathy gives them hope and healing. Neither works without the other. The source of strength, Thorn murmured, echoing the title the pack had begun calling her. That's what you are. Not just for me. For all of Irefong. And you're my anchor, she countered. My protection. My alpha. He cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense. I love you. I should have said it in the arena. Should have said it the moment I claimed you. But I'm saying it now. I love you, Avalini Loon. My rejected Omega who saved a ruthless Alpha from himself. Tears burned in her eyes. I love you too. Even when you're insufferable and dominant and refuse to ask for help. His laugh was quiet, genuine. Especially then, apparently. They stood together in the window, silhouetted against the moonlight, looking every bit the image that would become legend, the massive, powerful Alpha wrapped around his pale, ethereal Omega, golden light shimmering faintly between them. Dominance and empathy. Strength and healing. Ruthlessness tempered by compassion. 2 months after the trial, border disputes that had simmered for years were resolved through Avalini's mediation. 3 months after, a sickness that swept through the lower ranks was contained because her stabilizing energy helped the pack healers work more effectively. 6 months after, wolves from other territories began requesting audience with Ironfang's queen, seeking her wisdom and her gift. The pack that had once been held together by fear was now bound by something stronger: purpose, balance, and the recognition that their alpha and queen were two halves of a whole that made Irefong unshakable. On the anniversary of their claiming, Thorn and Avalini stood before the assembled pack as Corwin presented his findings. In the year since Queen Avalini's arrival, the doctor announced, we've seen a 40% reduction in internal conflicts, a 30% increase in successful hunts due to better pack coordination, and not a single challenge to alpha authority. The other territories are calling this the Irefong Renaissance. Thorn pulled Avalini closer, his pride in her radiating through their bond. They're calling it that because of you. You took a pack ruled by fear and taught them to rule themselves through balance. We did it together, Avalini insisted. Your strength gave them security to change. My empathy gave them permission to be more than warriors. As the celebration began around them, Thorn leaned down to whisper against her ear. The ruthless Alpha and his rejected Omega. They'll tell stories about us for generations. Good, Avalini whispered back, her hand resting over his heart where his wolf purred contentedly, finally at peace. Let them tell stories about how broken pieces can make each other whole. About how the weakest wolf became the strongest queen. About how real power isn't domination, it's love. The golden light pulsed between them one more time, steady as a heartbeat, binding them in a bond that had saved them both and transformed an entire pack. The ruthless Alpha had found his balance. The rejected Omega had found her strength. And together, they'd found home.